Today I would like to share with you my take on our own challenges, both internal and external. As for the external ones, they are existential, the reborn Russian neo-imperialism. The internal ones, however, may not necessarily be in plain sight. Ladies and gentlemen, at first let me stress the European Union is our natural political environment. But let us be clear about one thing. This is not the union of our dreams. We joined the European Union, which was supposed to provide us with economic opportunities. We joined the EU to benefit from the Schengen area, and we are taking advantage of it. However, the goal was not for the European Union to dictate the terms of our political system, our diet, or our upbringing of our children. There are certain forces at play that aim at creating a more centralized European Union, with federalisation used as a camouflage to hide the process. Its essence is to deprive member states, excluding two largest, of their sovereignty, downgrade their national democracies by being able to outvote them at the EU level, thereby taking away their role as masters of the treaties, abolish the principle that the EU has only those competences that the member states have granted in the treaties, and for the EU to grant itself competences by establishing the superiority of EU institutions over the sovereignty of member states. Contrary to popular belief, Poland, including the conservative camp to which I proudly belong, is not the enemy of the European Union. We merely oppose the currently dominant political ideals. And just like in any democracy, the opposition is not an enemy of the state, but rather a representative of a program and a political line different from the dominant one. As a consequence, Poland, like every member state, has its own vision of the EU and is entitled to it. We know the weaknesses and threats of such structures, the greatness of which is the will of stronger partners to dominate weaker ones. Therefore, we advocate for the rejection of the project of EU centralization. In matters concerning our political system and the future of Europe, the notion, then, that we would somehow dissolve into a vague European identity, subject to authorities and laws over which we will essentially have no influence, outvoted by the powers that be, dominated by the currently projected centralized EU system, and living under foreign hegemony, is a utopia detached from reality. As such, having those in mind, in order to stop and consequently reverse this negative trajectory of the process of EU centralization, Poland proposes the following actions. First, maintaining the principles of unanimity in those areas of EU decision-making where it currently applies. The same applies to the EU Council for Foreign Policy, which is headed by an official dependent on the great powers, and not by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the country holding the presidency, who has a democratic mandate. Fourth, basing the voting system in the EU Council in such a way as to eliminate the excessive advantage of large EU countries, to maintain the support of smaller nations for the process of European integration. These nations must have a real influence on decisions. In terms of geopolitics, stopping the ambition to compete with the NATO in the security dimension. Over the past 3 or so decades, the EU's security policy has not shown effectiveness. In the face of the post-Yugoslav wars, the destabilization in North Africa and the Middle East, or the Russian aggression against Georgia and Ukraine. The current attempt to centralize arms programs within the EU actually serves the interests of the German and French arms industries, directing money from the EU's joint debt to them. Since the current system has led us to debt, uncontrolled migration, energy crises, provoked Brexit, and exposed us to Russian imperialism, financed for years by the EU core, change is a necessity. The Euroscepticism, therefore, stemmed from the mistakes of the EU mainstream and its undemocratic nature. Ladies and gentlemen, this is in a nutshell my vision of which direction the EU should be headed at.